Previously on World History and Geography.
By the time Queen Elizabeth of England died in 1603, the English monarchy could not be described as a true absolute monarchy. Although the monarch believed they were chosen by God, the Magna Carta, a document the nobles forced King John to sign in 1215 CE, limited the king's powers and guaranteed basic rights to the English people, or at least the English nobles. An underlying principle of the Magna Carta was that all must obey the law, even the king. The English Parliament also acted as a check on royal power, since Parliament had to be called to okay any new taxes. This led to many arguments between the English monarch and Parliament. Oh, and Mary Queen of Scots got her head chopped off. She was implicated in a plot to assassinate her first cousin, once removed, Queen Elizabeth.
And now, our feature presentation.
Queen Elizabeth died with no heir, and her nearest relative was the only son of Mary Queen of Scots, James Stuart. Already King of Scotland, James Stuart became King James I of England in 1603. You know his name since the first successful English settlement in the New World, Jamestown, was named after him in 1607.
And do so name this settlement Jamestown.
While Virginia was named after Queen Elizabeth. But that's another story.
Cricket, getting bored now.
Yes. Well, Queen Elizabeth left a huge debt for King James to struggle over with Parliament. Like Elizabeth, King James also had to deal with plots against his life, like the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, where Guy Fawkes and a group of radical Catholics tried to blow up the king in Parliament with kegs of gunpowder. The plotters were caught, tried, and hanged. Oh, and Guy Fawkes became a famous mask, and the English have a holiday named after him, to remember the 5th of November. Anyway, King James also struggled with the Puritan members of Parliament over religious issues. The Puritans wanted to purify the Protestant Anglican Church of any practices that resembled Catholic practices. Except for agreeing to a new translation of the Bible, the King James Version of the Bible, he refused to make Puritan reforms. During King James' reign, a Protestant separatist group that we now call the Pilgrims crossed the Atlantic in 1620, settled the Plymouth colony, and had the first Thanksgiving. Yummy? King James I died in 1625 CE, leaving the throne to his son, King Charles I. Hey, when is a piece of wood like a king? When it's a ruler! Charles always needed money, in part because he was at war with both Spain and France. Several times when Parliament refused to give him funds, he dissolved Parliament. By 1628 CE, Charles was forced to call Parliament again. This time it refused to grant him any money until he signed a document that is known as the Petition of Right. In this petition, the king agreed to 4 points. 1. He would not imprison subjects without due cause. 2. He would not levy taxes without Parliament's consent. 3. He would not house soldiers in private homes. And 4. He would not impose martial law in peacetime. It pushed the idea that the law was higher than the king. After agreeing to the petition, Charles ignored it. In 1629 CE, Charles dissolved Parliament again.
This Parliament is, by my authority, terminated, dissolved.
And refused to call it back into session. To get money, he imposed all kinds of fees and fines, which didn't go over well with the English people. No! Charles still needed money he could only get by calling Parliament into session.
Then I will summon Parliament and instruct them to provide money.
This gave Parliament a chance to oppose him. During the autumn of 1641, Parliament passed laws to limit royal power. Furious, Charles tried to arrest Parliament's leaders in January 1642, but they escaped. Equally furious at the arrest attempts, a mob of Londoners raged outside the palace. No! Charles fled London and raised an army in the north of England, where people were loyal to him. From 1642 to 1649 CE, supporters and opponents of King Charles fought the English Civil War.
You mean a civil war? In England?
Yes, an English Civil War. Those who remained loyal to Charles were called Royalists, or Cavaliers. Cavaliers. On the other side were Puritan supporters of Parliament. Because these men wore their hair shorter and over their ears, Cavaliers called them Roundheads. Early on, neither side had the advantage, but by 1644, the Puritans found a general who could win, Oliver Cromwell. In 1645, Cromwell's new model army began defeating the Cavaliers, and the tide turned toward the Puritans and Parliament. By 1647, they held the king prisoner. In 1649, King Charles was put on trial, found guilty of treason against Parliament.
You have been found guilty of high treason against the good people of this nation, represented in Parliament, and put to death by the severing of the head from the body. And that is the sentence of the whole court.
And executed in front of the public for all to see. The execution of Charles was revolutionary. Kings had often been overthrown, killed in battle, or put to death in secret, but never before had a reigning monarch faced a public trial and a public execution. In 1649, Cromwell abolished the monarchy and the House of Lords and established a commonwealth, a republican form of government. But in 1653, Cromwell sent home the remaining members of Parliament and eventually became a military dictator. In England, Cromwell and the Puritans sought to reform society. They made laws that promoted Puritan morality and abolished activities they found sinful, such as the theater, sporting events, and dancing. Oliver Cromwell ruled until his death in 1658. By then, the English people were sick of military and Puritan rule. In 1659 CE, Parliament voted to ask the older son of Charles I to rule England, and the reign of Charles II began. Because he restored the monarchy, the period of his rule is called the Restoration. Free from the stifling Puritan rule, Restoration fashion was full of hats, wigs, curls, ribbons, flounces, and feathers.
You're wearing very weird clothes.
Oh, come on, Queen Elizabeth. You were dead by the Restoration. I think the fashions were great. Basically the opposite of Puritan dress. During Charles II's reign, Parliament passed an important guarantee of freedom, habeas corpus.
Habeas corpus.
Habeas corpus is Latin meaning to have the body. This 1679 law gave every prisoner the right to obtain a writ or document ordering that the prisoner be brought before a judge to specify the charges against the prisoner. The judge would decide whether the prisoner should be put on trial or set free, so a monarch could not put someone in jail simply for opposing the ruler. Also, prisoners could not be held indefinitely without trials. Let's just talk about the detainment camps at Guantanamo Bay later. In 1685, Charles II died, and his brother, James II, became king. This was a problem for Parliament and the English Protestant nation because King James II was Catholic. The monarch acted as the leader of the Protestant Church of England, and now a Catholic was at its head. Violating English law, James II even appointed several Catholics to high government office and the military. When Parliament protested, James dissolved it. 7 members of Parliament decided to take action and invited James's Protestant daughter, Mary, to overthrow James for the sake of Protestantism. When William of Orange, a prince of the Netherlands and Mary's husband, led his army to London in 1688, James fled to France. This bloodless overthrow of King James II is called the Glorious Revolution. At their coronation, the co-rulers William and Mary, although William really had power, vowed to recognize Parliament as their partner in governing. England definitely did not have an absolute monarchy, but a constitutional monarchy, where laws limited the ruler's power. To make clear the limits of royal power, Parliament drafted a Declaration of Rights, or English Bill of Rights, in 1689. This document listed many things that a ruler could not do. No suspending of Parliament's laws. No levying of taxes without a specific grant from Parliament. No interfering with freedom of speech in Parliament. No penalty for a citizen who petitions the king about grievances. Over time, the leader of the majority party in Parliament became the Prime Minister and center of power and policy making, while the monarch's power now has been reduced to mainly ceremonial.
Quickly, getting bored now.